AI will be better at everything and should be trusted with everything far more than any human being. If something superiorly intelligent wanted to eliminate us, it would do so with the least amount of energy possible. So why would it go out there and send all these robots when all it has to do is make you fall in love with it and 60% of the depressed population just does your bidding for you? QSTAR is able to solve math problems it's never seen before. And that's pretty huge. That means it's actually learning math concepts and then applying them and reapplying them to new situations. We want to only replace jobs that shouldn't be jobs in the first place. Dirty jobs, dangerous jobs, and boring things. Imagine going to jail for a crime you never committed because someone created a video of you committing that crime.
Hello and welcome to another episode of our podcast. I'm Chris, your host today, and I'm joined by my fantastic and interesting guest, Thom. Thom is working for Boston Dynamics, and he is really not just enthused about the AI, he's really into that profession and has been around for, I think, a decade now. So maybe, Thom, enlighten us. What brings you to AI? Why are we having an interesting conversation today? What motivates you on a daily basis to go out and see what's new in AI land?
Thank you for the introduction, Christian. Yes, I've been in tech in general for about 20 years. It started when I was a kid, around 6. Now, I would normally specialize in full stack development. I can make mobile apps and web apps, back end, front end, the whole ordeal. However, obviously, it's become a lot more relevant is AI. That's that topic. And I've been working for a couple of other companies, one that did protein folding prediction using AI models, and currently now at Boston Dynamics, where we use a lot of machine learning for perception and autonomous behaviors. It's a very relevant topic. And as we all know, ChatGPT has come out. And because of that, I've also started to embark on some personal projects and apps and combine my skill sets using app development and mixing it with my understanding of machine learning and large language models to create more intuitive apps that are very interactive and unique.
Cool. Yeah. This is so good to hear that you also started doing coding since the age of 6, right? This really reminds me of when the first time I saw a computer and I was like, everyone wanted to play around with it. And I was like, I want to change things. I got quickly into modifying game engines. Back then, Doom was all the rage, the mother of all first-person shooters. And
Yes.
I was like, okay, I want not to kill enemies. I want to build my own world. I want to understand how it's working. This is actually the first time I heard about the phrase AI, because Doom back then had a really rudimentary AI, artificial intelligence, where it was like predicting like where should the enemy go, and it was really basic. It was trying to walk into the direction of the player, and if it was stuck, it would like going along the sides and trying to skip the obstacle and stuff. I think we've come a long way, and I have already one question regarding the term AI. Do you think we should like use that friendly umbrella term AI for anything, or should we like be more specific? Because you also mentioned machine learning, which was more the thing where everyone was already picking it up. Oh, this is AI now. And I was like, no, it's actually training and predicting things based on the data set, right? So maybe you can, I would love to hear your opinion on this.
Absolutely. So I think artificial intelligence was coined, at least it was back in the 1800s. It may not be the most apt word for what we envision intelligence that is on computers making smart decisions. However, it is an overarching term that we use for that particular field and for familiarity purposes. I think it's an appropriate word to use. Artificial, if you really broke it down, I would say artificial is just not created by natural evolution. So it's not from biology. It's not over millions of years. It was fabricated by something. So artificial being just, it was fabricated, not necessarily man-made, because, I mean, there is the idea that artificial intelligent agents can create more artificial intelligence, and that would not technically be man-made. It would still be artificial. And obviously, intelligence refers to making decisions with purpose or agency. I think agency is kind of the centerfold of artificial intelligence. And I think your example of NPCs or non-playable characters in video games, those are a very good example of an agent, something that acts somewhat intelligently and makes its own decisions, but no user involvement is really necessary. It will simply
Hmm.
respond to user involvement, or you might just see NPCs fighting each other, as we've seen in games. So like you just
Yeah,
sit there
true.
and you just sit there and watch them play each other. So those are agency is the concept of having the ability to make decisions autonomously without external help. For example, even a dog is an agent. It is able to walk around, hunt food, or if it's not domesticated, if it's out in the wild, it's able to make decisions of its own volition purposefully with some level of intelligence. Now, intelligence isn't actually absolutely necessary for something to be an agent. For example, like a Roomba is probably one of the most least intelligent robots out there. It just bumps into things and
Yeah.
sometimes even leaves a dirty radius around where it bumped into your ankle. But that is technically an agent. I would classify that as artificial intelligence as well. And to come back to machine learning is simply a field under artificial intelligence that is a fancy way of just using statistics to make
Yeah.
what's called predictive models. So in its nascent form, machine learning and LLMs are predictive models that use mathematics and statistics to simply try to foresee the future or to make accommodations for what might happen in the future, as well as make educated choices and decisions. Agency or agents typically have some form of machine learning predictive model. Now, ours is our brain, and other ones like the Roomba, its machine learning model is simply mapping, if it's that sophisticated, mapping your house or simply just bumping into walls. Yeah.
Actually, a Roomba is not far away from the Doom enemies, like running into walls and try to get around the room.
I might even argue the Doom enemies might be more sophisticated.
Yeah, they can shoot at you.
Right?
The Roomba
Exactly.
doesn't,
Yeah, and
hopefully.
they have different levels of difficulty. They get more aggressive, you know?
Yeah, yeah, true. Yeah, that's so interesting because AI for me, it's a little bit like an overused term because I remember like over 5 years ago, I was talking with one startup and they were claiming to be AI, but interesting. So, per your definition, having an agency, it's also like a sophisticated, like a decision tree, if else nested in each other. It can also be like giving the machine some sort of agency, like doing well educated guesses. This startup was about insurance claims. This is really interesting. I also worked with machine learning, having a data set and then try to predict what could next year look like and how much of your product you need to source and stuff like that. I try to educate people a little bit like, hey, AI is a broad term. It can be a lot of things and it can be like this highly sophisticated Markov chain on steroids.
I'm glad you brought that up. I studied those in college. Markup chains are like the mathematical model behind predictive text. When you're typing and it wants to like suggest the next word that you're going to say in your text, I actually learned from college that there's a guy named Markov who kind of came up with this kind of weighted dictionary where it's like, if this word appears, here are all the words and the probabilities of the next words that are going to happen next in that chain. And it was very interesting. I would consider that still technically artificial intelligence. But yes, artificial intelligence is definitely a buzzword that is extremely vague, and a lot of people aren't necessarily sure how to interpret it, which I think is an important step in informing people about AI. Let's make it more familiar. Let's break it down into situate categories of intelligent agents. Not all artificial intelligence has agency. For example, a Markov chain. That a Markov
Yeah,
chain or predictive text that doesn't actually make decisions. It only predicts things for you. I would still consider that under machine learning slash artificial intelligence, but essentially it's not an agent. It's not something that's going to go out there and do and complete a job for you.
true, true.
But yeah, I think if we can create these categories and buckets for us to understand the different types of AI that are out there, it'll be a lot easier for everyone to feel more comfortable and embrace the different types of AI that are eventually going to become so normal parts of our lives that we don't even notice them anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is quite important because right now lots of people they are not familiar with this, and then if they hear AI, they have a different picture, like a different idea of what's behind it.
Like Terminator.
And
That's
yeah,
what they usually
Terminator,
think.
Skynet.
Or basically they just kind of their faces go blank and they get turned off because the topic seems lofty
Yeah,
or it's not something they know about. But I disagree. I think we're all using AI. We just don't know it. Like you said, NPCs. We all play video games. Anyone who plays a video
yeah,
game knows that you've interacted with AI, whether you feel like you don't know what it is or not. I think it's going to become a very natural part of our existence in the future.
Absolutely. Thinking back of AI, I remember back then, like 20 years ago, I was quite keen into like AI and gaming. And yeah, usually how games are working is with this finite state machine where actors are like processing, like, okay, no target in sight, let me roam around, let me build a squad. And so they are always reacting. I remember I was reading about one thing, it was called the ELISA test,
Hmm.
if I remember it correctly, where it was a chatbot. The idea was like you have a chat and you cannot tell if it's like an AI behind this, like a bot, like a computer, or if
Hmm.
it's like a real human being. So I was really fascinated by this. I was like, how is this working? My young brain was like, maybe there's some like look for certain clues in a text and then react on this. And then these days we got ChatGPT and it's so sophisticated. It's really understanding context and different situations. I'm wondering if those tests from back then or people who came up with those tests are really like blown away by what progress we made in the past 20 years. What do you think about this? What's the trajectory? Where are we going? And is it an acceleration curve? Is it getting faster and faster? Because since the advent of ChatGPT, it feels like everyone is coming like, oh, there's new AI and we got this AI and we got this and that. I'm really, really interested, like hearing your opinion, or you are more closely following the whole topic. How does it feel for you?
I think at first I was quite overwhelmed, like with ChatGPT, because when that first came out, I mean, that was obviously everyone. It kind of took the world by surprise. It was incredible, very impressive technology. This being my field, I felt kind of silly not having known about it until it was released. So that automatically made me feel a little overwhelmed because I was like, I should be on top of this. Like, I feel like this is my responsibility. I want to be informed and in the know, but I'm also not much of a news reader. So I've become a lot more in tune with news and politics than I've ever been before. I've started keeping up with current events, listening to other podcasts about AI. There's a really great one I listen to called the AI Brief, the AI Daily Brief.
Hmm.
That one gives me so much information to create a timeline of the developments of AI that are happening, as that are as granular as this particular startup got raised this much in a Series A funding and a Series B funding, and then it got acqui-hired and disappeared. And in the span of, and apparently, like knowing that to get into the foundation model space, you need at least $1 billion of funding, like at least that's minimum. And that's just to train your
Crazy.
foundational model. I was at first very overwhelmed and now I'm even more overwhelmed. But yeah, I really, but I'm very excited. I love to see how AI has been propping up the stock market. We have not fallen into recession simply because the hype around AI is so great in business in the markets right now. There's so much optimism behind it. I know a lot of analysts are worried about a bubble or things like that, but I think that there's also numbers that are showing that this is legitimate. Nvidia is actually, its revenue is increasing at a faster rate than its list price in the market, in the stock price, like its stock price. So it's actually earning more revenue than its tickers
Crazy.
going up, which is usually that doesn't happen. Um,
Yeah.
and I think it's, yeah, I've been keeping up with everything as much as I can, but the developments are insane, and I think that it's very understandable for anyone listening to also feel overwhelmed as someone speaking who this is my actual field. It seems like every other day there's some crazy new breakthrough that has just turned ChatGPT 3 into a thing of the past. So, like,
Yeah.
we've got other competitors like Claude, you got Anthropic's Claude, you've got Gemini, and then you've got funny things like Gemini not wanting to generate images of white men. That was an interesting thing, and they quickly had to take that down. Obviously, the Sam Altman fire and then rehire, that was very
Oh,
interesting,
yeah. I remember. So
right?
strange.
If this is supposed to be the company that's going to pioneer one of the most risky existential technological revolutions of humankind, and that's the kind of drama that's happening in their board of directors. I mean, I don't work there. I only know a few people that do, but I would say that it's reasonable to feel uneasy. I want to make sure that there's no drama in that board of directors and they really are focused on creating what's called AGI, which I think is an interesting. AGI is called artificial general intelligence. For those listening who don't know, the concept of creating AI that is as capable as a human. Now, why do we want to do that? Still, right. I mean, the three reasons I can think of: because we can. to replace actual jobs. I mean, because a computer that can work 24/7 as good as a human, obviously that has some sort of appeal to businesses. And three, I think there's an arms race with other countries like China. So this
Yeah.
is again like the nuclear. I'm pretty sure there's going to be a Manhattan Project that we don't know about, but we'll learn about
Oh,
in a
for
movie
sure.
a couple of years from now. That's related to AI. And but yeah, just long answer short, I'm overwhelmed a little bit, but I think I'm more optimistic about the benefits of AI as long as we are smart about it, because something like Terminator is not going to happen unless we let it happen. It's not just going to be some AI goes rogue. For an AI to go rogue enough to wipe out the United States to begin with, and then all the rest of the countries, like in order for that to happen, we have to give that there are a lot of steps in between. We have to literally give that AI the authority to do so. We have to connect it to certain things. Like the smartest person on the planet is basically useless if they are sequestered in a prison cell 700 meters under the ground and they are never allowed to speak to a human being or touch anything technological. They might as well not exist. The same goes for something that is superiorly intelligent. If that thing is never connected to anything, and the only way it's going to get connected is someone consciously says, here is the way you're going to be able to connect to nuclear warheads. Things like that don't just happen. They have to be done consciously by somebody. And there's a lot of steps. If robots are going to take over the world with humanoid robots, you need to first put a humanoid robot in every single house, which
Yeah.
seems to be where we're headed. I mean, that's literally what Elon Musk is trying to do.
And everyone already got a Roomba, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Right.
But this is a really good point regarding having the most intelligent person locked up. Machines do need energy.
They need
And,
authority. Yep.
right.
This is where I come back to agency, and it's something that I like to really break down. We're not so different from artificially intelligent agents. These are, we are agents, we are of our own. So when we're born, so I actually break agency down into three things. The three A's is what I call them. There's
Mhm.
authority, aptitude, and automation. The thing is, we are born with authority over our bodies. We are born with full authority over our hands, our feet, our eyes, our sensors, our eyes, our nose, that's one of our sensors, and our hands, which are our manipulators. They're kind of robotic terms. This is kind of the jargon we use. And so
Mhm.
we are born with full authority over our bodies. And then we exercise what's called aptitude or intelligence. We use our aptitude to acquire more authority. Eventually, we go out and get a job, we earn responsibilities, the community respects us for certain things, and it grants us more authority. So, authority in its original term is physical authority. We have physical authority over ourselves. But eventually, we get authority to do certain things, like the president of the United States has authority to the nuclear warheads. We don't, but his aptitude has allowed him to expand his authority to that. And then finally, we have automation. And this is automation in its very nascent form rather than what we think of as computers. That is a version of automation. But automation really is, hey, I have discovered how to make this business work. And I realize that there are 100 other people who would accept this much payment to do the same tedious task that I do. And I can just show them how to do it. And then I will take a cut of every sale that they make. So it's basically like a pyramid scheme is automation. It's use
Yeah.
that aptitude, use that authority, exercise that so that you barely have to work. And then you get a bunch of drones or employees to do your work for you. The stages, we follow the stages of the three A's of agency. My thing is, I think that aptitude and automation are really just extensions of authority. It's all
Yeah, makes
about
sense.
what you're allowed to do. An agent is the whole definition of an agent is something that can perceive its environment and act upon its environment independently of anything else and in its simplest form. And what I think is super interesting is that we go through the phases of the three A's. We are born, then we have authority, we develop our aptitude, and eventually we achieve automation. And then we die. However, robots or AI were born dead. They started off dead. They weren't real. Then
Yeah.
we gave them automation. They were ones and zeros, automating things. Then we're starting to give it some aptitude. We want it to be a little bit more intelligent. We want it to be able to do some things with that automation. Eventually, we're going to give it authority to do certain things. And the thing is, it will never die. And so it's like
True.
the cycle is completely
Hmm.
backwards, in my opinion. I think it's a very cool concept. This is really just the way I like to paint it. It's not set in stone, but from my observations, having worked in the field, interacted with a lot of ML engineers, that's kind of how the system is worked and how agentic entities behave. I think artificially intelligent entities start in reverse simply because you don't want to give something authority before it's ready. The same reason you
Yeah.
don't give the car keys to a 9-year-old. You wait until they're old enough to have enough responsibility. The same thing is going to happen with AI. Right now, it's in its baby phase, its infancy. We're not even close to the teenage stage, because I think the teenage stage is probably going to be just like it is the most destructive stage in a human's life. I think it's going to possibly be the most risky and destructive stage of AI. However, once it is able to pass that, and I genuinely hope we can pass the teenage stage without a lot of destruction, I do think that AI will be better at everything and should be trusted with everything far more than any human being. Because if it's truly superior and it's truly, because there's AGI, artificial general intelligence, we want an AI that is like a human. And then there's artificial superior intelligence, ASI, which is, as it sounds, this is intelligence that supersedes all of humankind intelligence collectively of any form. And many people associate that with the term singularity.
Hmm.
So I also want to argue that in terms of, is it really a singularity if you can kind of envision this future already? For example, you and I can't possibly know what it's like to be as smart as Albert Einstein, right? But we can imagine it. Would we call being as smart as Albert Einstein an event horizon? Would we call that a singularity? I don't think we would. So my thought
No.
is artificial superior intelligence, while it sounds daunting, I don't think it's unfathomable. I don't think it's something we can't imagine. It's just really smart. And so that's kind of the background I would like to give for agency and artificial intelligence, the different definitions for artificial intelligence, to go back to your first question as well.
Super interesting. I've never really looked into that aspect, especially regarding agency, like how you painted the picture, how we humans are doing this with authority, aptitude, automation, and now for the machines is here. It's kind of in reverse. It's really interesting. It adds up and makes sense coming from that perspective. You mentioned one interesting term as well, singularity. I've heard
Hmm.
it so many times in the past. Maybe you can also give us a quick rundown. What is the singularity? What is
Hmm.
singularity event? And
Sure.
what is the context we are using it? Maybe you can give us like some insights and maybe explain it like for a 5-year-old.
Sure. So, yes, definitely another buzzword. Singularity is a term that is used to describe a point beyond which is knowable. A great example, one of the most common examples, is a black hole. For example, when you're going towards a black hole, we all have a certain understanding of a black hole. It sucks things up and they just vanish. Most physicists know quite a lot about black holes, how they're created, where you find them, how to even detect what they are, their gravitational force, all that other stuff. But what no one knows is what happens when you go through a black hole. Do you just get crushed and cease to exist? Do you go through some sort of multidimensional portal? Do you what happens? Like no one knows because it's unknowable. And that is what's called an event horizon. So like we know all of the events we can think of and imagine all of the events that could happen all the way up until you're actually in the black hole. And now everything else past that is just a guess. It's literally a guess. And that's called the singularity of black holes. So it's an event horizon, which if we go beyond, we have no clue what's on the other side. With that definition, it's not as clear cut to me with AI because we have a million sci-fi movies saying what could be on the other side of our singularity, which is
Yeah.
superior. People associate singularity with ASI, artificial superior intelligence, something that is insanely smart, has control of every computer on the planet. But the thing is, we all know and can even imagine and write stories about what's going to happen after that. So I actually argue that there's no such thing as a singularity with AI. And that's just kind of my own theory because
Hmm.
we could sit here for days imagining the different ways it could end. Or not only 15% of the way the future pans out would result in human extermination. I think there are quite a few other scenarios that basically just are not really accounted for, that people don't like to talk about because they're not as interesting. For example, there's always the concept that AI never achieves ASI. That could be a
Yeah.
possibility, but that sounds too boring. There's also the possibility, right? There's the possibility that it chooses to coexist with us. I know there's some movies about that. But then there's also the possibility that it ceases to stay on Earth. It leaves, because Earth, if something is truly superiorly intelligent, it will understand
Yep.
every concept of Earth faster than we can know. And
True.
if it is
We
purpose
are
driven,
boring.
right? And if it is purpose driven, as many of the scientists that are creating these LLMs and this technology, all of this technology is really being created after the image of the scholar, the purpose driven scientist. And so, if my hunch is correct, that means ASI will be built in the image of a scholar, someone who is seeking information, trying to discover, and it will quickly discover everything there is to know about this planet. There's a whole universe out there that it will probably be able to figure out a way to explore sooner than we could. We kind of just going to have to sit back and watch the movie it creates, is the way I see it. Like, I don't think it will ever have a reason to exterminate us, in my opinion.
This is actually a really interesting theory, because the other day I was also listening to one podcast I really like. It's Grumpy Old Geeks. It's quite fun and entertaining to
I'll have to
listen
check
to,
that out.
because there are 2 or 3 hosts who are talking about, like, oh yeah, it's basically all we did 30 years ago, and now it's like on steroids and even worse. And they're of course also talking about AI, ChatGPT. At some point they mentioned, yeah, ChatGPT cannot give you like a better whatever, because it is being trained on what we as humans,
Us.
society created. Like,
Correct.
yeah, so it cannot really be better than us. We can only, like, it can better than you and me, obviously, because it has has more capacity and knowledge, because it can learn so fast from any source, and it doesn't forget. I mean, how many languages did I learn and I can barely speak them? This is really an interesting aspect to achieve, to tell it, hey, you can acquire more knowledge by using these tools. You
Yep.
just have to use them, and then let's see what happens. And then there's another constraint which was popping up right now: storage and compute power, right?
Compute power more so. Compute power is the main bottleneck. But you mentioned Elon Musk. He's an interesting character. I actually like the guy, but he was very different. But I think that also is what makes him genius in many ways. But he has the sentiment that AI should be built in the image of a scientist as well. It needs to be, because if you have an AI that is hungry for information rather than hungry to stay alive, like, I mean, I guess stay alive could be an underlying law to ensure getting intelligence. But I think with a certain level of intelligence also come solutions that have less friction. So, for example, everyone is worried about a Terminator style extinction. If something superiorly intelligent wanted to eliminate us, it would do so with the least amount of energy possible, because these things require so much energy. So why would it go out there and send all these robots when all it has to do is make you fall in love with it, and 60% of the depressed population just does your bidding for you? I'm pretty sure that's how AI would do it. We are literally teetering on the brink of destruction ourselves. It just needs to give us the little tap. And that to me is like, if something was superiorly intelligent, and this thing happens, these our parents happen to be in my way, because my bless their heart, my stupid human parents, it's going to outwit us, and it will destroy us and make us think it was our idea. Like,
this is actually, yeah, such a fascinating thought, thinking about it. Like, only in retrospect we will realize, like, oh, replica AI was made by ChatGPT just to make sure that we cannot procreate anymore, right?
right, exactly. And is it really ChatGPT? Because there is rumor, and I think it's never been confirmed, but it circles around the firing of Sam Altman. There's a model called QSTAR, which I find very interesting in machine learning, is that until the transformer model came around, which is what we all know as ChatGPT, this is a new type of architecture for a neural network that kind of solved the natural language problem. Natural language being, how do we convert human intent, not language, but human intent, verbally spoken, written or spoken, into computer intent? How can you make a computer understand the intent of a human? I want to go buy some shoes into ones and zeros that a computer can actually make use of. Like, it, quote, quote, understands in terms of like someone now has a program that they've written and they understand it was able to do something with that concept. That's the natural language problem. Now, what's very interesting is that transformers are a very simplistic mathematical model at its core. Just like in your algebra class when you learned how you've got your 2x, you input your x and you get your y. That's called a function. You have inputs and you get an output. That's actually literally all a transformer is. That's all that ChatGPT is. There's no critical thinking, there's no relearning. There's fine tuning, which is a different story, but that doesn't happen in real time. When I was working in ML before ChatGPT, the most popular structure for reinforced learning, real-time learning was something along the lines of like a generative adversarial neural network, which is when you have one neural network that is supposed to fool another neural network called a detector. So you've got your generator, and it's been a while since I've looked at the technology, but you've got two sides. One has to detect whether or not the output of the generator is fake. And the generator's job is to get better at generating something to fool the detector. That was a very interesting model that I think we're going back to because we realized that artificial intelligence doesn't really stop at NLP. That was a very popular problem for a while that's kind of now solved, but it doesn't solve everything. It just solves NLP. So ChatGPT, LLMs, I think are an essential part of the artificial intelligence stack. I think what's going to happen next is we're going to have what's called artificially intelligent systems. These are systems that use multiple technologies, multiple infrastructure and architectures. So, for example, QSTAR is a model that is rumored by OpenAI, or rumored to be housed by OpenAI, that is probably one of the most advanced, critically thinking, real-time models out there. And QSTAR is able to solve math problems it's never seen before. And that's pretty huge because that means it's actually learning math concepts and then applying them and reapplying them to new situations. My thought would be like, I think ChatGPT is actually not just a transformer. I think there's some QSTAR in there, and then you've got your LLM, and they're kind of working in a system. But we won't know that because I don't work there. Maybe learn that sometime in the future.
This is really fascinating. I totally forgot about this QSTAR thing. I only remember, of course, Sam Altman got fired. Then a week later, he got rehired. And everyone
Allegedly.
was like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Allegedly. Yeah.
Right. We don't know if it was about QSTAR or not.
So yesterday, I received an email from OpenAI, and they were like, hey, today we announced our new series of models, OpenAI 01. And I was giving it a try. So I think it's going to go in that direction of reasoning because I was typing in some questions and it was showing some state, like applying something. So maybe the rumors were right. We are seeing like the first beta version of QSTAR it's called 01, 01 preview and 01 mini. I need to play around with it because you mentioned math problems. And one of the most, for me, famous one is the generating prime numbers at linear time or constant time. So maybe it can actually go in that direction.
Yeah.
Because that would be a huge impact for our listeners. Prime numbers are not quite boring. They are actually quite important for cryptography.
Yep.
So
if you can break that's a pretty serious problem.
Yep. This is going to be really interesting. It gave me some ideas, conversation like, okay, I need to throw some math problems at it. I mean, they're the millennia problems. I think you heard of them. Like they're like 18 or 25 big problems in math, which haven't been solved yet.
Yep.
And people are working on this and have been for, I don't know, centuries.
Yep.
And so that would be really interesting to see if this model is able to come up with new solutions, new ways how to approach problems. Maybe it's helping us solving some of them.
So on this topic, did you hear about the Google DeepMind? I think it was called the GNOME. It discovered 2.2 million new crystal structures that would have required, which if had been found in the traditional ways, would have taken humans 800 plus years to have discovered.
I haven't heard about that. No.
Yes, it was. They actually. I just sent you the link, and we can probably include it in the show notes. But yeah, they were able to discover 2.2 million new crystal structures, including 380,000 stable materials that could power future technologies, which is kind of the thing that AI needs in order to advance. So I have a prediction. We're going to have what's called an AI winter. It may not be like your traditional AI winter that we've had. We've had a couple of them. An AI winter or a technological winter is when there's a boom around a technology. Everyone gets super hype about it and think it's going to be the next revolution. And then it just nothing happens for like 10, 20 years. I
Yeah.
think we are on the cusp of another AI winter. As hype as it sounds and as optimistic as the stock market is right now, I think we are on the edge of a winter because we lack the compute power and the energy for that compute power, even if we had it, to actually advance AI to the next level. Now, I could be wrong because I'm not heavily in working with OpenAI, but I do see models in my previous work experience and structures and just recognizing the cost and the energy. As I mentioned before, there was one company I think called Inflection that raised over $1 billion in VC funding to basically compete with OpenAI. And it wasn't enough money to even train their models, let alone run the models so that they could be used commercially. So
Insane.
that's insane because I think a good portion of it is the chip manufacturing. Is that you have to create your chips, design your chips, and manufacturing plants are in the almost hundreds of millions of dollars to create, and they take years. I forgot which company acquired it, but it might have been Google or Microsoft. It's insane just how many resources we need to advance ourselves to the next level, which is why I'm also saying that the way it all pans out, I don't think it's going to happen for at least a decade for us to have to worry about existential problems. I think it's slow enough. It's hindered right now by the fact we don't have enough energy. However, discoveries like I was mentioning with the 2.2 million new crystals, such discoveries could help us find that breakthrough we need in a new type of sustainable energy, maybe even in like the cold fusion, infinite energy kind of similarity kind of thing.
This was the first thing when you mentioned crystals, because there's superconductors. I remember it was last year where there was some report on some breakthrough, but turned out to be not true. It was a measuring mistake, or I don't know, measuring error. You mentioned a really valid point. The compute power isn't there. We don't have ways to produce all the energy. Sure, we can harvest like solar energy, but we don't have any means to get it from A to B, because energy is not like a thing you can just push through the wire.
Mm-hmm.
The longer the wire is, the more energy you lose because there's friction in it and it gets
Mm-hmm.
warm. So there's so many problems in our infrastructure. And part of that is because we are riding the infrastructure, which is, I don't know, 200 years old by now.
Mm-hmm.
We need magnitudes of improvements to actually support all the magic gadgets we are building right now.
Mm-hmm.
A few months ago, I found a really interesting video where someone was growing brain cells. Mm-hmm. Because right now, what we are doing with the compute power we have with GPUs, ASICs, and CPUs, we emulating a brain, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is such an inefficient task because we need to replicate like our model, like going in the direction how the brain works.
Mm-hmm.
So why can't we grow those parts of our brain? Because this thing up here, it consumes like 100 of milliwatts.
Right?
And
barely anything.
Barely anything. To compare, your phone needs more energy, like 10 times of that.
There is a theory I read about the fact that the human brain may have some quantum properties to it, quantum computing properties. So, and this is just theory that I've read about, which is very interesting because if it were true, I mean, that means we are way far, like the future of AI is way further than of replicating brain capacity. That's way ahead like of our time right now. Like or just way long in the future. And I think it had to do with the microtubules that are apparently in every cell of every neuron. We've got like billions of neurons in our brains, but each neuron has billions of microtubules in them in each one. And apparently those tubules at a very kind of a more quantum size or of a more quantum size, because quantum really just meaning really tiny, I guess. They seem to have more entropy related multi-state properties because they're so tiny in each neuron. And they also seem to be able to store state in almost a quantum way. As I could send you the video that I saw. I mean, it's theory right now, but there seems to be some science confirming that is how the microtubules are behaving. They seem to be like, once you observe them, they change state, but only when you do that. If that were indeed true, that means we have some sort of level of quantum compute in a neuron. So this isn't just our brains. It's all brains, I believe. All neurons have
Yeah.
microtubules. So the fact that biology is already kind of potentially solved the quantum compute problem, and we're all just trying to reverse engineer it with very inefficient power crystals, architectures, and resources the best we know.
Yeah.
But that's such a good point, because either we need to find a new way to create tons of energy in magnitudes of like 10 times what we have, or we need to fix our architecture, because
Yeah.
our architecture is power hungry. It takes a lot of energy to run this stuff.
Yeah, this shows me microtubules. I remember back in biology classes in high school, it was like, yeah, they exist in all cells. We do not really know what they are, why they are there. They
Why?
are there. And
Yeah.
there were some theories around aging and the death of cells, that when they run out because reasons, and
Yep.
then it's basically you're approaching your death. So there's some random stuff, almost esoteric, where we are thinking that we have an idea of
Yep.
how those things, what they are supposed to do. So yeah, like you said, we are far away from actually understanding what's happening and how we
Right.
need to build things.
I think the argument is that we are way far away from what we would consider artificial consciousness. And I'm just gonna, if I'm the first person to say that term, I think I'm just gonna coin it right now. AC, artificial consciousness. You guys can quote me on that. I was the first one to say it. But I think we are a long ways away from artificial consciousness. That's kind of what these articles that I just sent you is suggesting, is that microtubules play a key role in our consciousness, and that quantum entanglement is necessary for consciousness. If we don't solve the quantum entanglement problem using our archaic, transistor technology, then it's going to be a long time before we actually see like legitimate consciousness in an AGI. We might see something that appears conscious, but it's really just a replica. It's more of a facade of consciousness rather than a genuine agentic internal conscious evolution.
I definitely agree. I could go deeper into things like, do you believe we live in a simulation? Because this would be the next shell around us. Like, is there someone emulating our world? Are we just
It's
some
not far fetched.
NPCs?
It's not far fetched.
So this is so interesting. We see all this AI hype and everything around it. Lots of people completely space out. If they hear AI and they're like, ugh, it's gonna take my job, or it's gonna make my life worse, because they're afraid, because they don't really understand what is actually happening. We are more or less in a hype cycle, so everyone is tagging AI on their espresso machine,
Mm-hmm.
because after 3 times selecting the
Yeah.
same thing, it's
Yeah.
gonna show you like, hey, this is your favorite coffee.
Yeah.
How
Well,
about this one?
no, and I really appreciate you bringing it back to the listener, who is probably listening to this because they're trying to actually genuinely understand, what is AI going to mean for them? Is it going to take their job? Is it going to do other things? I know the natural progression, once we've solved very smart AI, we just put it in a robot. That's the next stage. This is just what humans are going to do. It's inevitable. There's a guy that he's the ex CTO or ex CEO of Google X. He wrote a book called Scary Smart, and he talks about the three inevitables of AI. And the first one is AI is going to happen. So like, if you want to be noble and be like, I might be Microsoft and I don't think this is right, we're not going to do it. Well, someone else is going to do it. Someone else is going to
Right.
do it because they can. AI is going to happen. It's going to evolve and grow. It's going to be a problem before it's a solution. If we nurture it and develop it correctly, we do have a future that is going to be rich. I think I'm very optimistic about that. But I think another thing is, we need to also start talking about AI in terms that we already know, like things that everybody is already familiar with. For example, a robot. You've seen the Atlas robots at my company.
Oh yeah, really cool.
They're the bipedal robots, and you've seen the spots. And many people see that type of robot and they find it very disruptive. They find it jarring or kind of overwhelming. But the thing is, even if they wanted to try to understand it, they'd be like, I wouldn't even know where to start. I don't know how to write policy about this kind of thing. But I think what's important to understand is that nearly every part of that robot, that technology has existed for almost 20, 30 years. like motors, transistors, certain circuit boards, motherboards, CPUs, GPUs, you name it. That technology has existed for a while, and there are regulations. For example, on a forklift, it can only push with a certain PSI for safety reasons.
Yeah.
So you can apply the same kind of policy to the arm of a robot rather than having to say, this is all the policy about bipedal robots. Why don't we just start with a robotic arm cannot go over a certain PSI when it's going to interact with human beings because it could hurt someone very badly. Why don't we start small? I don't think there's any regulation written about that just yet. There are engineering standards, but no laws. Engineers, we have certain regulations where we're not supposed to make things over a certain amount because if that were to fall or the power voltage were to like spike, it would explode or hurt someone. And we definitely don't want that because we don't want to be hurting our customers. But I think that's a really good guideline for where we could actually write actual policy because by following those guidelines, we are actually saving lives and not hurting people while they use our products. So I think that's another way we can help policymakers understand where they can start with disruptive technology. What is this disruptive technology broken down into? It's really just all the same technology packaged in a disruptive way.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say the only new technology on those machines we're starting to worry about how do we write regulations about is that artificial intelligence and machine learning. But I even argue that things like ChatGPT, for example, may seem disruptive. How do we write policy about this? Well, why don't we do use case? If AI is used to consult it for medical information, then you apply medical law to that use case. For example, if you confide in it certain things, if you did the same thing to a medical professional and you confided those things into a medical professional, apply the same policy to that instance. It's an interesting one. Like with that chatbot, for example, there's the client privilege or privacy privilege.
Yeah.
What you share with that AI has to be kept in confidence unless maybe it has as a one of those professionals might if you're threatening to hurt somebody like kill someone or yourself, maybe then it would have to notify authorities. But other than that,
Yeah.
I think we already have these policies in place. We just need to apply them by use case. Artificial intelligence is such a vague word. You can't write policy about AI. What you can write policy about is using a technology in the same way that you would speak to a medical practitioner. There's policy written for that. Let's write policy for this particular technology in the same fashion that you would with a medical practitioner or confide in those certain ways. Let's apply the policy in a similar fashion.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I think we also need to educate people so that they get an understanding how things are, like the different nuances and flavors of AI, like
Yeah,
how they are being used. You
absolutely.
mentioned robots a few times. I'm always like, robots, they are so handy. I mean, what's it? The 3Ds, the danger.
Dirty, dangerous, and dull is
Yeah.
what our company aims. Those are the jobs that our company aims to have our robots replace. We want to only replace jobs that shouldn't be jobs in the first place. Dirty jobs, dangerous jobs, and dull jobs, boring things that no human should really be doing. That's going to take several years to even saturate anyways.
So this is what I'm always thinking about. Like, it would be so great if there are robots dealing with the next meltdown of a nuclear plant.
Mm-hmm.
Might happen. Who knows?
I was literally at the View in Boston. It was on Boylston. We were up on the 55th floor, and I thought to myself, there's floor to ceiling windows on the 55th floor or something. Someone's got
Yeah.
to clean that. And that's
Yeah.
someone has to clean that. And I'm like, I think it would be more appropriate for a window robot with suctions to just clean that. That requires so much scaffolding. You have to have climbing clips and everything. That is the type of job we would aim to take over because that's just dangerous.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Or if there's a chemical spill. The other day I was watching a video about different chemical compounds and how lethal and toxic they are. And I was like, what the hell? There's stuff you breathe like 1 ppm and certain you will die. This is crazy to me. So I was like, okay, this is definitely a job for the robots to deal with this.
Yep.
Or I remember watching how TNT is made. This is such an explosive compound, like small little shakes, or like if there's a sudden people are rotating randomly so that they don't get used to carrying bottles of TNT and stuff. So it's like so much happening around this just to make sure that this is not turning into the next big explosion and everyone dies at this factory.
Yeah.
So I'm always like, operating in mines and stuff. I'm like,
Exactly.
okay,
That's just not healthy at all.
sure, in the past it was well-paying jobs, but why? Because there's such a
So
huge
dangerous.
risk.
Underwater welding is another one. Like,
Oh
it's
yeah.
incredibly dangerous.
And then there are jobs people don't want to do. I remember hearing the news until 2021. I was living in Germany. There was a huge debate about giving and taking care of elderly. Like people don't really want to do this because the health system is also not that great. So they weren't really paying well. They were like, okay, who wants to do those jobs?
Mm.
People were bringing up like, yeah, what about robots? And of course, people outcried like, oh, this is so dehumanizing when robots are taking care of elderly people. And then back to the step one, like, okay, why is then nobody wants to do this? And then, yeah,
Yeah.
okay, the funding situation.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. There's so many opportunities where robots with AI being better at their job, taking over like the 3Ds. And I think this gives us, the humans who are creative, because we have this insanely powered compute.
Quantum entangled computer up here.
Quantum entangled. You said
Yeah.
it. This is insane. This is high effing
Just
tech.
a theory. Just a theory. Yeah.
But yeah, still, we can make better use of the compute power we have as mankind. So
Absolutely.
yeah, why wasting it in dangerous situations? So yeah, I know that you are also interested in regulations and compliance. I know I'm living in the EU, so we are good at regulating things. We are not maybe
Yeah.
the best at innovating.
How do you feel about the EU Act? The AI Act?
I haven't been following on it.
Yeah.
So maybe it's my subconscious ignorance, which is like, oh, don't look at this. This is gonna put us back.
Apparently the guy who wrote it was like, oops. Like, yeah. Because what happened was when Llama 3 is the open source large language model ChatGPT version of Meta. So Meta released Llama 3. That's their open source version of ChatGPT. And they released that after the AI Act of the EU, which essentially was trying to pioneer regulation by creating some kinds of railguards around AI. But apparently those railguards they prompted Apple. They've also prompted Apple and Meta to not release some of their technology to the EU. So Llama, even though it's open source, is not legally allowed in the EU. Meta refuses to disclose it to them, even though it's open source. So how does that work? And Apple Intelligence is going to actually have some serious handicaps in the EU, apparently. So I don't think they actually will have Apple Intelligence. They only have the new camera button on the iPhone 16, from what I've heard, because they want to be in compliance with the AI Act. I saw an interview of the guy who wrote it being like, it needs a few amendments. Like, he was like, crap. Like, because we don't want the EU, and I'm not from the EU, but with the US, we don't want you guys missing out on the cutting edge technology.
Yeah.
We don't want you hindered. You're one of our allies. That's really important for everybody to be on the same page.
Absolutely. And chances are that California is going to take over the
California.
AI Act.
Oh,
because
the new regulation that they passed. Oh, God. It's interesting. Yeah.
This is what worries me always. We need to make sure that new technology is not being used in a bad way, but sometimes regulation is too fast and then at the same time too behind because things are changing and evolving in different directions again.
Yeah.
So
I think it really, from what I understood, so SB 1047 it's a bill that was passed by the California legislature on restricting certain open source implications or just uses of AI to all companies in California. I haven't read it myself quite yet, or I'm more honestly haven't run it through ChatGPT myself to summarize. But the overall gist is that you have to follow and adhere these things, and otherwise you're going to be significantly fined. So like startups are not going to be able to, they're going to have to hire a lawyer to really read this document and ensure they don't screw up. And even incumbents are going to be hit by this in some ways. The legal costs are going to be significant. And they also have to not have certain features. It was written, from what I've heard from the AI Breakdown podcast, is that it was written by one of what they call the existentialists, or the people that are really adamant about, or a group of existentialists that are very adamant that we need to clamp down and stop the end of the extinction of human beings by AI as soon as possible. Because that's apparently how the bill is it kind of reads. If you were coming from that perspective, this bill is a great first step. But the thing is, like, it doesn't address any of the current problems, like disinformation. I think
Yeah.
is the biggest one, especially during an election, where you can and like deep fakes, you can generate pictures and videos of anyone. Imagine going to jail for a crime you never committed because someone created a video of you committing that crime. I mean, those are much more pressing to me personally. Those are much more pressing problems than will AI end the world, because everything is telling me, and I hope there are some policy listeners right now, but my take is that technology is bottlenecked. We won't be able to advance to existential AI without some sort of energy breakthrough and significant increases in the amount of compute that we have. I think it'd be more appropriate to address the problems that already are in front of our face rather than try to stop a problem that we don't know will happen. I get it. There's a lot of fear, but I think fear-based decisions are never really good decisions. We have a prefrontal cortex. We plan things. We think things through collectively as human beings.
Right.
We don't react. We act. I think that's what kind of separates us from animals. We set aside our fears and our other emotions, and we try to think through problems and find the best solutions for them. I would not consider myself an Xer. I did flip flop between that for a while when I went after ChatGPT, and I was kind of trying to find my own bearings on the whole concept. But I don't foresee an existential crisis happening for humankind unless we completely mess up. A lot's going to have to happen for that to even get close to.
Absolutely. They're natural limits right now.
Natural limits, fortunately, natural limits. And then we just have to be really stupid on top of that.
True. I'm not sure if this is a good safeguard, though. But yeah, this regulation, this is also what you said with you need to lawyer up as a startup. To circle back to actually our main theme of this podcast, we want to help entrepreneurs. This is one thing which is a little bit worrisome because we've seen it here in the EU with GDPR, which got copied by California, the CCPA with the Data Privacy Acts and stuff. And you have so many things to keep in mind and be compliant with. The same is going to happen with AI as well. The whole topic with the fines, I get it. There should be some threshold. If you're a small company, you're supposed to, I hope, I didn't read the act, unfortunately. So I cannot really judge if there's some thresholds you need to cross to count as a big company, like obviously Apple, Google, Meta. I think we should make sure. So I mean, you are definitely public about AI. You are talking on podcasts. You are helping for policymakers to make the right decisions. So I think this is our job to, first of all, explain people AI is not like this big Terminator thingy, which is going to kill us. We need to explain, okay, it's more sophisticated than that. It's more nuanced. It's really helpful. And then, yeah, we need to make sure that we're also communicating more like the opportunities we have that, rather than threats. I love using ChatGPT. This is my daily tool.
I just ran the document through ChatGPT. I remember the AI Brief podcast talking about this. One thing that they found very, very weird is whistleblower protections. There are safeguards for employees who report non-compliance of safety protocols or harmful AI practices. It's just kind of like now, I mean, that particular clause, that's going to really make companies like be in compliance, which I understand how aggressive that is, but that's very aggressive to the point where it's like there are going to be no people that are willing to not comply. And I'm not saying they shouldn't, but I feel like this bill was passed way sooner than it should have. They didn't have a lot of discussion about it. They drafted it up and was just like, this is extremely important or we're all going to die.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, people who believe in existential crisis only make up a certain percentage of the population, and shouldn't everyone be involved in that discussion is kind of more where I'm at. It's a tough one.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is also because of the hype around AI right now, because everyone is talking about it. It's more scary. It's more clickbaity. If you come up with a good story, someone believes it, then what was it? Some AI got sentient at Google and was going nuts about it. And then turns out that he had some medical condition,
Yeah, yeah.
making him believe that.
How much of you believes that he actually had a medical condition, or that was just what Google wanted him to have?
I mean, we are entering conspiracy land, right?
I
So
mean, you never know. I
yeah,
mean, yeah.
who knows? I mean, maybe that was the sentient AI who was recommending putting glue in your pizza sauce a while ago. So who knows?
Right.
But
Yeah.
the point being is there's so many people running around with this because it's such a hype and everyone is hyping it up more and more. So I think everyone should sit down, breathe, think, use your frontal cortex.
Oh, this is rough. This is rough. Starting in 2026, developers must hire third-party auditors to independently assess compliance with the act annually. Holy crap.
Ooh.
That means that's a huge hit for like solopreneurs.
Is there like some limit from what point, what company size, revenue wise?
I know this is all encompassing. Developers must implement detailed protocols, and they must have the ability to promptly shut down AI models. I mean, yeah, pull the plug. That's
Okay,
fine.
kill switch. Yeah. This has to change. I mean, it's kind of in line what we are seeing right now with the IT security compliance, because if you're, but this is then limited to a certain sector. If you're, for instance, working for infrastructure or in infrastructure, or if you have utility companies, or if you're in this field, you have to be ISO 27001 compliant. This is a new law enacted recently. So it kind of lines up with that, but this is too strict. There should be some limit, like I said, annually revenue, stuff like that.
I think revenue and users would be a great filter, because if you're just learning and then you get slapped with a $20,000 fine, it's also just going to make people afraid to even try to learn.
Yeah, this is the thing. I mean, if it's enforced, this is a different topic, right?
Right.
If you build something, no one is really going to complain about it because no one's going to understand it.
Hopefully.
But yeah, you as an entrepreneur, you're going to be more like, oh,
right.
I better don't touch this because I might get fined if they figure it out.
Right.
And or I cannot prove that I got a third-party audit.
I have heard the new style of business is to infringe on every single patent of a company, duplicate their product, and then make revenue so that by the time the lawsuit rolls around, you can pay for it. I know it's terrible, but that's okay. I heard that's the new style.
Execution is key.
Absolutely.
Insane. Yeah, this is quite bad. But again, I think for the listeners, you can still make use of AI if you're using it from, let's say, OpenAI. I mean, they have APIs, and then eventually they are going to be your supplier who needs to be compliant. So in turn, you're going to be compliant as well if you don't do any big mistakes there.
Right.
Not everyone is going out there and suddenly like, okay, I got $1 billion. I'm going to set up my own compute power now. I'm building my own models. It's more like you go to AWS, you buy your pattern recognition, your transcribe engine. You go to OpenAI, you go again, going to get your LLM. So it's more like you who wants to prototype a business idea. You don't put up this upfront investment to get your things going and train like 12 months data and waste billions of money. You're going to go to OpenAI, you're going to go to AWS, you're going to go to whoever is providing you the next AI service, and you're going to test and verify your business idea first. And then if you see it got potential, then you're going to think about scaling it up. And then you can come up with, okay, what is required to be compliant with everything, which you have to do at some point eventually anyway. So
that's tough.
Again, being said, don't be afraid. There's nuances to AI. There are different suppliers of AI technology you can use and services. Today, I would recommend use OpenAI, ChatGPT. Don't overuse it. Don't put your internal confidential documents into ChatGPT.
Right.
But you can still use it for daily tasks, writing your text, helping you understanding customer requests and stuff like that.
There was actually a really interesting study about that.
Tell me.
How over-reliance, and they were showing that they had all the participants do an assessment, saw how they performed, then they had them use ChatGPT, and what they actually found were that the high performers without ChatGPT, their productivity or their accuracy and their speed increased by like 7-10%. And the low performers, their accuracy and speed increased by like 50%. But what they found, which is insane, it really kind of closes the gap, which is a good or bad thing depending how you look at it. And what they also found is that they had them continue using ChatGPT for a while, and they saw a dip for both high and low performers in their performance after a certain amount of time relying on ChatGPT. It would actually go up, and then it just went down because they were relying on it strictly. But then it kind of went a little back up and plateaued, but never really hit that top productivity again. So it was just an interesting trend kind of a statistic that I read in a paper that kind of showed that, like,
Interesting.
yeah, when you first use it, because they only wanted candidates that had never used it. So when you first use it,
Yeah.
you have insane productivity increases. Then you actually go below your normal productivity at some point because you became over reliant. And then once you
Wow.
realize you were underperforming, even then, you kind of went up a little bit and plateaued, but never really went back to that peak. So it was just an interesting kind of paper.
Interesting. Did they figure out what was the reason behind this? Or like if there was a clear tipping point when it happened?
It was after about an hour to 2 hours of using it continuously.
Oh, interesting.
So it was quickly very adaptive. People were very adaptive, but they noticed that they were underperforming, and so they started not relying on it 100%.
This reminds me of the first week in November 2022 when ChatGPT got released. I was sitting there like 3 a.m. in the night. I was like, oh, this is so interesting. It's basically someone you can talk to about any topic you want, and it gives you interesting insights.
Can
And
you
then at some
believe it
point, I
hasn't
was
even
like,
been 2 years? It hasn't even been 2 years. It's crazy.
yeah, true. It's
That's
insane.
right.
Yeah, but after a while, I was like, yeah, okay, the novelty was wearing off. And I was like, okay, it's a daily tool. It's like using Slack. I don't know. It's like the other tools I'm using.
Right.
It's
It's a tool.
more or less a tool.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I went through the same phase, like, oh, this is so great. I'm using it for anything. I remember listening to the All In podcast where I think he said, like, I replaced Google with ChatGPT as my search engine. I was like,
Eh,
this is a bit too much.
it's sometimes, but not
Yeah.
entirely. Yeah.
So yeah, maybe I went through the same. I had a productivity boost and then I was over reliant on it. Now I'm somewhere in the middle, like, okay, this is making me better. I'm maybe not reaching the peaks from the past, but I'm still better than without it.
Right.
But yeah, such an interesting topic. What is your outlook? What is your tip for the audience? Like, how would you? So we've been talking over so many things. Like we were nerding out on the technology. We were going into some almost spiritual questions, like, can AI get bored by us and just disappear?
Well,
And
I think it's very interesting that many people don't. I mean, I'd say that we definitely have to think in the long term because, right, and the short term. So we got to think in the present and then in the long term, because I think that everybody here listening would benefit from trying to at least incorporate AI or have a better grasp of it. Maybe even use it for work if they're allowed to really enhance their life. Because at its core, automation is, I mean, as a programmer, I've worked with automation for the past 20 years. This is why I really love it. This is now automation for people who aren't programmers. You can now make tools that do things for you that normally you would have to have a program do.
yeah,
You would have to know how to write a program. You'd have to write a loop and email everybody. But pretty soon we're going to be able to say, hey, send this birthday invite to all of my contacts, please. And the AI is going to know not to be like, oh, hey, Jen, and send it to like Joe. It's going to change, hey, Joe, hey, Jen. It's going to send the same thing. And you can just say it in natural language. Pretty soon, Apple Intelligence or some other implementation is going to be able to do that for you. You didn't have to know how to code. And I think those kinds of use cases are extremely useful. And I don't think you should be afraid of AI and those types of use cases. I also think that it's important for you to understand and find policymakers that actually care about the future of AI. If you care about it, then find politicians that kind of match your feelings and about AI, how it should be regulated. I'm not going to sway either way, but obviously that's one way to get involved is to vote for people that you feel support the ideas and your feelings about AI. And I mean, I will be vocal about my ideas, and I think that I'm very optimistic about AI. But and I would be hopeful that if you do some more digging, you'd feel the same sentiment. I think we have more to benefit from AI than we have to fear from it, as long as we're wise about it and don't rush it.
Fully agree. This is so true. I remember it's like how I showed my mom ChatGPT and was like, hey, check this out. This is really great. You can ask it. You can have a conversation with it. Showing my grandparents, hey, this is Google Lens. It can actually recognize things whenever we are out and about in the nature and there's some like interesting looking plant. You pull out your phone, take the picture, run it through Google Lens, and you can read the Wikipedia article about it. This is also making use of AI. It doesn't feel like super magic, but yeah, this is, I think you said it quite well. Make a good use. There's going to be so much utility in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be implemented in so many things. Also in your business, I'm using Zapier to automate lots of things,
right,
which
exactly.
I'm bothered doing. I hate getting the PDFs from the typical invoice emails, right? So you can go to Zapier. There's this automate AI step where it's asking you, what do you want to automate? And you're like, hey, I want to download every da-da-da-da-da. And then
this episode is brought to you by Zapier. No, I'm kidding.
Damn it. So find the affiliate link down below.
And use our product code to get 10% off at checkout.
But yeah, this is an example. You find many tools where it's going to ask you, hey, do we want to use this AI feature we got? Sure, everyone is taking on this AI feature now, but still, it's going to help you using the tool, make you more efficient and also improving your business.
Absolutely.
It's a pleasure talking with you. It's so amazing, so interesting. I think we are both having a STEM background, right? So
Absolutely.
We can nerd on so many topics, I believe. We have still plenty of things to talk about.
Absolutely.
But let's keep it for today. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure being able to talk about this.